Okay, so let's get into progressive era and all the change that's going to be taking place from all of the things that we have covered up until this point. We've covered quite a bit in Gilded Age, all of the things that are going on, even some of the things that are technically progressive era going in. And we're going to review those things right up at the front end, and then we will jump more into all of the ways that we're going to seek to kind of fix these issues that have been taking place. Okay, so here are just a quick review of what we literally just went over. And so I want to just run through it really quickly. So the 16th Amendment, if you remember, this is federal taxes, okay? 17th Amendment, the direct election of senators. Okay, so, and that was because we're dealing with civil service reforms and things like that. So civil service reforms, nobody can get a job without taking that merit exam. So now jobs are based on merit. They're based on the fact that you qualify for them. And direct election of senators is based on the fact that you were voted in now. Okay, so nobody can get a job for the spoil system. So if you remember, the spoil system is you do for me and I do for you. So you do something for me and I give you a job in the government. This can't happen anymore with the senators and party favorites. And it can't happen in civil service jobs either, like that of police officers and fire chiefs and other bureaucratic positions. It can no longer take place. You have to take a merit exam and you have to qualify for the job. Political machines are the guys that are doing that you do for me, I do for you spoil system, but they're doing it for immigrants, okay? Immigrants are coming over and they're met with nativistic, so nativism. They are met with this attitude right here and a little bit of that xenophobia as well, and they can't find jobs and stuff. So what this is they're doing is providing them a service. They're giving them the jobs and the place to stay and stuff like that in exchange for votes. So that's that spoil system, and they will no longer be able to do it either. This is really going to help stop that. Immigrants will be working in terrible conditions. They will be making very little money, and they will be living in tenements, which are those really small apartment complexes where I said like 10 people would be living in one room kind of thing. If you remember initiative, referendum, and recall, this is more progressive era, but I had covered it already. And this is the idea that people can start taking control of what is going on in the government, which also helps mitigate some of these issues over here. So initiative was the fact that you could do put around a people to sign, get enough names, and then get a law put on a ballot, and then if everybody votes for it, it becomes law. Referendum. So this is initiative. So I'm going to put on here to create a law. Create a law. Okay, this is you're taking the initiative. You're taking the initiative to create a law, and everybody has to vote for it to get in, for it to become a law. The bill has to win. Referendum is the same thing, except you are removing. You are removing a law. Recall is going to be the concept that you are trying to get a politician out of office before their term is up. Okay, so you're trying to do this before the next voting day. You want them out now. You don't want to wait until the next voting day. Populist Party is our first third party, really kind of spearheaded by the idea of unions, people coming together for the purpose of creating equality and making everything going on more fair. And so unions are going to come together. The Populist Party is mainly made up of farmers. You have the Farmers Alliance, which is the union. Okay, so the Farmers Alliance, and many of them are going to end up being in the Populist Party, and that's where we'll see the most successful third party and actually, get things put into place and voted on, like the 16th Amendment and the 17th Amendment, as well as the Interstate Commerce Act, which regulates the railroad on how much they can charge. Okay, and of course, like I said, we would also see the Sherman Antitrust Act, which is going to seek to get rid of monopolies. Okay, so this is kind of the nutshell. This is everything that we were dealing with before going into the progressive era. So now we're going to talk about how are we going to fix the other things, like how do we fix child labor? We talked about that in the last video. So how do we fix that this time? So this is what we're going to get, and it's a fun little word, muckrakers. Okay, so who are our muckrakers? Well, there's a lot of muckrakers going on at this time for different things, but the one that I want you to focus on the most are these four right here, because they're the most likely to be tested, and you have already been taught all of the other ones. We're just reviewing right now. So Lewis Hines, like we had talked about in the last video, Lewis Hines is for, he's going around and taking pictures of child labor, okay, to get people on the bandwagon of, hey guys, we've got to stop this, and we need to get these children in school. So if you don't like being in school, this is the guy that you can thank for starting this movement of getting kids out of the factories and the coal mines and things like that. Okay, so child labor, and this is going to lead to child labor laws. This is where the first Child Labor Act is going to come from, and it's going to make it more difficult for people to work. This sometimes is tested through a map, and it'll show like it's almost like a poster, and it's saying child labor is down by this much or whatever. And it's the idea that child labor goes down because we have policies that are stopping it. We're working hard to stop child labor and to get them into school and where they belong. Okay, so Ida Tarbell, she is going to be your journalist. She is a journalist, and she is seeking to get rid of the oils and big business bad practices. Okay, so bad practices that are taking place. I did not spell that right. Practices. Okay, and she is going to go after Stanford Oil. And if you remember, Stanford Oil is led by John D. Rockefeller, which we covered yesterday when we talked about our captains of the industry. John D. Rockefeller is one of your captains. Remember, I said that doesn't mean that he is a good guy. It just means that he spends some of his money by building things like libraries and hospitals and schools, but it doesn't mean that he is not participating in bad things. Okay, so him and Andrew Carnegie are both considered captains of the industry, even though they have bad business practices with regard to the people who work for them. Okay, so Upton Sinclair, he is a writer. Okay, forgot to put here Lewis Hines, photographer. I know I said it, but I don't know how to spell writer. So Upton Sinclair is a writer, and he is going to write a book called The Jungle. Okay, and initially he comes out and he's trying to give people an idea at what immigrants have to deal with within the meat packing industry. But what people really take hold of is the description of how this meat and everything that they eat is prepared, and this is what really is going to drive the move to fixing the meat packing industry, because people are not happy that they're eating nasty food. Okay, so here we go. Writer of a book, The Jungle, and he is taking out the food industry and how it is prepared. Okay, and it is going to lead to the Pure Food and Drug Act, which you need to know. They test over this so much. You cannot escape the Pure Food and Drug Act. Okay, so gotta know. You see Upton Sinclair, you see The Jungle, you know they're talking about the food industry and the Pure Food and Drug Act. But what they're more so wanting to know, we'll get into once I tell you what Jacob Riis is. So Jacob Riis is kind of your first photojournalist. Okay, he is taking pictures of immigrants. Okay, and he is taking pictures of their condition and where they're living and where some of these kids are who don't have parents now because they've died in the factories and stuff like that. So, and it is going to create like a move. He's pulling on the heartstrings of people, and they're going to want to start finding out ways to help them. So he is going to end up helping the immigrants, right? Helping people become more aware of the condition in which they live. But all the way around, the actual idea of muckrakers is the fact that we are trying to get the government involved. This unchecked capitalism, can't really see that, sorry. Unchecked capitalism that led to monopolies, okay, has created all of these issues, and the government's not getting involved, and we need these people taken care of. So muckrakers are starting to do the dirty work. They're digging up dirt. That's literally the idea. Muck is just another word for dirt, the dirty, yucky stuff. They're digging it up. So they're muckraking. They're raking the muck, okay? And they are coming together to try and fix these issues. Government, get involved. So the main effect of all of these things, because the causes is unchecked capitalism. That's what causes all of this. But the effect of muckrakers, so muckrakers' effect is the changing role of the government. The whole point is the government getting involved and starting to pass legislation or laws to fix these issues, like passing the Pure Food and Drug Act, okay? So the government got involved and they passed the Pure Food and Drug Act. So now the government is actually involved in the food industry by things that we like to call regulations, meaning you can't bleach your meat to make it sound like to make it look like it's still good, right? If it's not good meat, you cannot prepare it and sell it to people to eat because they'll get sick and possibly die. So regulations is really important. But this changes the idea, because before we had unchecked capitalism. That means hands off, right? If you remember that word, laissez-faire. If you remember that word, that was hands off government. Okay, that's what created unchecked capitalism, created monopolies, created all these issues that people were dealing with, and now it created muckrakers, which the effect of all of that, changing role of the government, we now have regulations in private business. But it's also going to create something else, which we talked a little bit about, which was unions. We talked about the American farmers and them coming together in a union, but we're going to talk about some of the other strikes and major events that took place that really created that last bit of where the government needed to get involved, which was starting to regulate the owners. So yes, we have the Sherman Antitrust Act, and monopolies and trusts are illegal, but it's not really working. And yes, the government is beginning to get involved with regulations with regard to how things are done and put out to people and stuff like that. But we need regulations inside the company with how they're allowed to treat people. And so we will talk about the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. Okay, so we are getting into strikes and riots and disasters like the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, and I'm going to put right here, fire. Okay, so what is going on here? The Pullman strike is going to be, these are railroad cars, okay? So it is a factory that makes these high-end railroad cars. And they're going to go on strike and strike the long hours and the low pay and the things that they have to deal with. But most importantly, they are going to be striking the idea of only hiring unionized workers. And so this is going to be really more of a pull into how unions are working within factories. And we were going to have the Haymaker riot as well, which is a violent riot. Of course, it doesn't start that way. It starts off peaceful. It turns violent because the cops get involved, and tons of people die. People are thrown in jail over this. Some people are given the death penalty. It's not until quite a few years later that 3 people are pardoned for their working in this riot, in this original protest that turns riot. But what this is going to do, we're going to really see I'm going to put effects right here. Okay, so we know what are the effects of all of these things. Okay, so remember what causes this is, I'm going to put down here, what are the causes of all of these riots and of strikes and riots and disasters? Okay, so what are the causes of those things? It is low pay, long hours, and dangerous working conditions. Okay, and that's what inherently causes these disgruntled employees to do something about what's going on. But what causes disasters that are at the hand of the company itself? And that's a lack of regulation. Okay, so we still have a lack of regulation going on within these companies. Now, so how do we get over here? We know the causes of strikes and riots and disasters within a company, but what are the effects when they do happen? So the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, the factory itself is going to catch on fire, but the factory has been cutting corners in every way it can and mistreating its employees. So anytime the women would organize a strike and go on strike, they would be thrown in jail. The factory owners would pay off the cops to illegally put them in jail for striking and kind of just force their hand to work there. They cut corners, did not have anything set up to protect the people in case of a fire or something like that. The fire escape is too narrow to get down. Doors were locked. There's no way to handle these situations. Many women died. They got locked in, and so they burned to death. They got shut into I'm sorry, email came in. They got shut in an elevator. They and burned to death there. Inhaled too much smoke. There was women who jumped off the building and died that way. This was an 8-story building, and the firefighters came up, and their ladder only reached to the 7th story. So it was just a whole bunch of stuff. And of course, the owners made it out because they just got on the top of the building and then hopped to the next one over, but no one else could reach that. So a lot of people died. This made it everywhere. And so the big thing was, even though these men only had to pay $75 per family who lost somebody, even though they got $400 back in insurance because they insured their employees, it did bring to light the fact that we need regulations in the company itself. So the effects are that we are now going to have regulations with safety, with regard to safety, okay? And with regard to labor and how you're allowed to treat your people and stuff like that. And we will have the idea of 8-hour work days, okay? We will have Labor Day. So you ever wonder, why do we have Labor Day? What is that about? That comes from this, Labor Day. Okay, so these are the effects of these things. So when it's unfortunate that things have to get to this point before we can get over here, when we have all of the evidence right here and here, but these things have to happen generally for us to get over here. That's why we're always studying the causes and the effects. That's why we always have to study the tough stuff to find out why we're over here. Why do we get to walk around and live in a world where minimum wage is a thing? Why do we get to live in a world where there's the idea of 8-hour work days or Labor Day and stuff like that, a 40-hour work week, and over that is overtime. Why do we live in a world like that? Well, we have to study this stuff to get there, okay? So, but we're going to move on. We've got some other things to study, like the women's movement, the early civil rights movement, and some other amendments that are going to take place. And then we're going to study Teddy Roosevelt. So let's jump in. Okay, so let's get into some other things. The 18th Amendment. Now, during all of this time, we're going to have what's called the temperance movement. Okay, and it is going to be led mostly by women. And this is going to be prohibition. See if yeah, you can't see it. So I'm going to write it right here. Prohibition. When you think prohibition, you got to think prohibit. Okay, so prohibit is the idea of making something illegal. It is prohibited. You are not allowed to do it. And what they are prohibiting is alcohol. So alcohol is now illegal because of the 18th Amendment, okay? And it will be strengthened by an act called the Volstead. The Volstead Act will strengthen this. Most amendments, when they are going to initiate something, they're going to have an act that is going to help strengthen them. And so the Volstead Act is going to be what we're going to use to try and push this into people having to obey the temperance movement. It's going to be a failure, but we'll talk about that later when we get to the 21st Amendment. But for now, the 18th Amendment is prohibition. It is led by the temperance movement, mostly a Christian women's movement. And it is to prohibit the sale of alcohol or the consumption of it, and it is backed by the Volstead Act. And we'll talk more about the issues that come from that in the 1920s. 19th Amendment is women get to vote. And this is going to happen 1920, okay? Things that you need to know about that. Very simple. Women vote in 1920. How do they do that? A ratified amendment. Okay, so there's always a question that asks, how did women gain the right to vote? And it's not the protesting or all of those things. Those things helped us get there, but really the thing that allows women to vote was the ratification of an amendment. So an amendment was ratified. That is always the answer. Okay, they like to play with words, but that's the answer. Okay, so women's suffrage is led by whom? Elizabeth Cady Stanton is going to lead the women's suffrage, and she is going to be most notably known for the Seneca Falls, New York Conference. And another test question that you often see is their Declaration of Sentiments. And it's pretty much them laying out the things that are wrong and what they want to see fixed. And it is mirrored after the Declaration of Independence. And so this is an easy question when it asks you, because it literally sounds like it, okay? Declaration of Sentiments is mirrored after the Declaration of Independence. It was created, drafted, and signed and everything in Seneca Falls, New York, at a suffrage conference, and so which was led by Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Other people were involved, but most notably her. Susan B. Anthony is going to be known as the the mother of the 19th Amendment, because she's going to be doing a lot of footwork to get signatures and stuff like that, to get it on there, to get it Congress to put it on the ballot and get it voted on and things like that. She is really going to be working hard to get this 19th Amendment through, and so that's why she's known for that, okay? Very simple. We're keeping this surface level, remember? So early civil rights, Webb Du Bois, what you need to know about him is he believes in the top 10% thinkers, okay? So that elite thinkers, those top people that are going to college, he really supports collegiate learning. And this is important because we'll cover this a little bit more when we compare him with Booker T. Washington in the 1920s. But he believes in collegiate learning of the elite thinkers to try and push change for African Americans. And Ida B. Wells is really an advocate for African American women's rights. Okay, and she's also for the pushing out information about anti-lynching. She wants to really make the world aware of what's going on, especially in the Deep South with regard to lynching. And so she is both for women's rights, and she is going against the practice of lynching in the Deep South. And so these are your first kind of early civil rights people that we see. And both of them are going to come together, and they are going to create the NAACP. So they are the founders of the NAACP, and this is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. That's what it stands for, and they are going to be the people who found it. And the main purpose of the NAACP is to take things to court. Legislation. Okay. Everything is going to go to court in order to change things on a legalistic level. So this is what you need to know for early civil rights. This is what you need to know for the women's suffrage movement going into the exam. Okay, so let's get into what's going on during all of these things domestically. We've got stuff going on in other areas, okay? America has always been what we like to call are going on. So we've got Cuba and Spain. Spain is participating in imperialism in Cuba. What is imperialism? It's the idea of one country taking over another one and using it for their resources and stuff like that. So that country is getting good off of this other country's back, pretty much, and not letting them be who they need to be, in very, very simple terms. Okay, so Spain is doing that to Cuba. All right, and we don't get involved really. I mean, it pulls on Americans' heartstrings, but because we were the underdog, but we don't really get involved until the USS Maine is sunk in Havana Harbor outside of Cuba, and we want to know who did it. Well, journalists come out and they do what we call yellow journalism, and a really good way to consider what is yellow journalism. It's kind of like what we would consider the idea or concept of fake news is today. So yellow journalism is the idea that we're trying to drum up news to try and get something done that we want done. Okay, so yellow journalism, one of the famous lines that they often use in your test is "Dirty Spaniard sunk the Maine." Okay, now if you read that, you would automatically think, hey, the Spaniards sunk the Maine. That's messed up. Let's go fight them, right? But we don't necessarily know if it was the Spaniards that sunk it. So the yellow journalism makes us want to go do something that we don't necessarily have proof of in the first place, but it works. And so we go to war with Spain. Now, Theodore Roosevelt at the time was working. He was the Secretary of the Navy, and he is going to leave that position and create the Rough Riders. And if you remember back in your last two videos, I mentioned the Buffalo Soldiers. Those are going to be your African Americans that are helping those exodusters fight off Native American. They are going to join the Rough Riders and go over to Cuba, and they're going to fight the Spaniards, and we're going to win. And what do we get when we win? Well, we tell Cuba that as of right now, they can remain on their own. They can have their independence for now. But we are going to acquire, and that is a very big word to remember because it is always used on your test. Acquire or acquisitions. Okay, so the acquisitions are the land that we acquired, and that is the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico, which is really important because they will come back into play in World War II. But for now, we acquire these. Spain secedes them, so cedes them to us. Okay, it's kind of like signing over a note for a car. That's what Spain did with these countries. Okay, and so they become ours, and we become imperialists, and we'll get the idea of people rising up in the United States who are fine with us taking over these countries and using them for their resources, and then those people who are not okay with that, those people are your anti-imperialists. Okay, but we do acquire these three, and it is going to help us economically. Economically good. Okay, why? Economics goes up, money goes up. Why does money go up when you acquire land? Because you acquire their resources. So we're going to make money off their resources. We're also going to come out and be known as a world power. Why? Why are we now known as a world power? We're known as a world power because, yeah, we defeated Spain, but we're really known as a world power because we acquired these countries, these islands, and we are allowed to use them for our economic good. So that is why we come out the way that we do. Now, outside of all of this, Theodore Roosevelt will eventually become president, and he has a lot under his belt. He was the Secretary of Navy. He went over with the Rough Riders and became and fought the Spaniards, and now he will eventually become president, and we'll talk about that when we go into what's going on with the presidents, Theodore Roosevelt and his policies, and then we'll get into Taft. Then we'll get into the Progressive Party, and then who is going to take the presidency going into World War I. From Gilded Age, we're fixing everything. We're seeing some big movements rise up, like the women's movement, and temperance is going on. Temperance movement for the prohibition is going on. We are seeing civil rights movement going on. All of these things that we're going to see really come to play in the 1920s. But what is going on with our presidents and what is going on with foreign stuff as well? So we know that Teddy Roosevelt left the Secretary of the Navy position. He went to go fight in the Spanish-American War with the Rough Riders. And then he is coming back. He's going to be elected president. He is going to have a policy called the Open Door Policy. This policy is going to open us up for free trade with China. So we're going to start doing trading with China. And the purpose, more resources. More trade, more resources. Okay? And it is a success. And this will come into play more so in World War II with why we're really going to start putting embargoes on Japan. But for now, we're looking at it just as in the open door policy, China trade, more resources. Roosevelt is also going to jump off of the Monroe Doctrine that has already been set into place that tells the rest of the world to stay out of the Western Hemisphere. We are now going to go into the Roosevelt Corollary, where he is going to tell the rest of the world to stay out of Latin American affairs. That's our area, okay? And how is he going to actually do this? Well, we are a world power, and we have extra money from those acquired land, you know, when we acquired Puerto Rico and Guam and the Philippines. We have more resources. We are a world power, and people know that, and they're scared of us. But what we're going to start doing is we're going to beef up our military. Yes, this is always a really good assumption that the United States is going to do. We will continue to build up our military from this point on forward, but it is going to be called the Big Stick Policy. And the idea of Teddy Roosevelt's Big Stick Policy is that you speak softly, but you carry a big stick. So pretty much what he's saying is you tell somebody to do something in a nice way, and then if they don't listen to you, you go beat them up, okay? And how are we going to beat them up? Our big military, okay? So that's the idea here of the Big Stick Policy to back up the Roosevelt Corollary and our imperialism that we are doing with regard to certain nations that we've acquired and other nations that we want to stick our feet in. Once Roosevelt is out of office, Taft will come into office, and he is going to pass dollar diplomacy. And this is the idea that we want to give money. So U.S. companies are going to invest in other countries' okay, so that we can help build them up. So the companies are going to invest in other countries, and it's a failure. Other countries don't really go for it, okay? He was looking for a less militaristic way of doing diplomacy with other countries, and it didn't work. Roosevelt is going to be upset about it, though. He doesn't like that this is what Taft is trying to do. So when Taft goes to run for his second term of presidency, Roosevelt is going to flip around and run again for presidency under the Progressive Bull Moose Party. Now, what you need to know about the Progressive Bull Moose Party and any third party, really, other than the Populist Party, what they inevitably do is take votes away from the two major parties. So they take away votes from the other two parties. Okay? All right. People, a third party always branches off of a main party. So if I have these two parties, okay, Party A and Party B, and Party A is more of a liberal party and Party B is more of a conservative party. Well, it turns out that Party A is not happy with the way that their party is dealing with some things, and their party refuses to listen to them. So what they do is they branch off and they start to create another party, and this is your third party. This happens with either. It happens on both ends, okay? Now, the people who are voting can choose to vote from this party or this party. So all of the more liberal voters now have two parties to vote for, splitting the vote. Whereas this party has all of the people who were originally conservative will all vote for this particular party, and they're more likely to win, and vice versa depending on how it takes place. The only way for this party to get back the votes is to take whatever this party, the third party, went off on, whatever topics they want to fix, and they merge it back into their party, and then you have one party again, and people are okay with it, okay? So when the Bull Moose Progressive Party that Theodore Roosevelt creates goes off, it takes votes away. So here what we have is Wilson's party, and then we have Taft's party, and then we have Roosevelt's party, okay? So Taft and Roosevelt split the votes. Woodrow Wilson takes them, and the effect is Woodrow Wilson becomes president for World War I. So going into World War I, he will be our president for the United States. And that is Progressive Era as of right now in a nutshell. And your next video will be over World War I.